This week's podcast is all about process. It doesn't matter if you're an employed mortgage broker or self-employed mortgage broker, having a well-structured process is key to your success. You're listening to the Mortgage Broker Broadcast with me, Craig Skelton, the podcast which helps mortgage brokers at all stages of their mortgage broking career. Welcome back to the Mortgage Broker Broadcast. This week's podcast is all about process. For me, the key to the success of a mortgage broker, of being a mortgage broker, is all about process. Having a process helps create habits, and if it's habitual, it's far more likely to happen. There's less friction, and less friction means it will get done. It also creates structure to ensure that the client's experience, the client's journey, and the service they receive is 5-star. So what I want to do is sort of strip it back and just to give an overview of what a process could look like as a mortgage broker. You might have a process already that works for you, then that's great. Or you might not have one, and there are brokers that I do talk to that have a process. The brokers that I talk to that don't have a process. And so what I'm saying is that I'm going to go through my process and what I would do. However, I'm not sort of saying this is the only process and this is the only way. I'm just giving you an overview of what my process looks like. It also, as well, if you've got a process already that works for you and you've got it nailed, then that's really good. But what I'll talk about today is you might think that actually there are tweaks or there might be things that you're missing that you can build into your process. And with everything with a process, it's just about layers. So once you've got the process right and it's well structured for you and it's habitual, just adding in those extra layers won't cause you too much drama and won't cause you too much friction, but it might help and enhance your process. So what I want to do is break it down into 3 sections really. Let's look at when a lead comes in, let's look at then what happens when we turn that lead into a client, and then let's look at what happens sort of post-completion. So when you receive a lead, when that lead comes in, it doesn't really matter where that lead comes from. It's understanding and knowing what your process is once you've received that lead. So a lead comes in, it could be from an introducer, it could be from your own social media, it could be something you've generated yourself. It doesn't really matter what happens or where that lead comes from, is what you do now with it that's the important bit. So really, let's look at that lead coming in. You call that lead. Let's look first of all as what your process is if you're not able to contact that lead. So that lead comes in, you make your calls, you email them, you text them. What does that process like to make sure that you are following it up until you're told to F off, which is what I've talked about in other numerous podcasts. So if you don't get hold of them and you don't get them booked in at the first attempt, what is your follow-up process? Do you follow up, or do you just give it a couple of attempts, leave them alone, and think, well, they know where I am, they'll reach out to me when they need some advice? Or do you actually follow them up? And that for me is key, because you should be following it up until they tell you to F off, as I've said before. So what does your follow-up process look like? Are they into your CRM at this stage? So are they into your client management system at this stage? For me, I would say absolutely that data needs to be in your CRM system, absolutely needs to be into your follow-up. And the thing with it, with regards to not getting them booked in, is that you still need to have that follow-up process, because you could still be marketing to those people who maybe something's happened, they might not now want to sort this out today, they might move on next week, sort it out a month later. But it's all about making sure that they reached out to you in the first place. So you want to make sure that when they are ready and when the time is right, they contact you. So what does your follow-up look like? How does it look into the CRM? Because like I say, you need to be following up on the lead if you don't get them booked in. What if you do get them booked in? What does your process look like from there? So do you use an online booking system like Calendly or Bookings or anything like that? Does that or is that automated? So does that client journey and that process is set up? So once they book in your diary, do they get an acknowledgement email? Do they get an email the day before and now before? So again, like I've said before, within this process there are layers of process as well for different things. And that's something you've got to look at if you're using an automated booking system, because once it's set up and the people are into that process, it's set up and that's all automated for you, which will take out parts that you need to do and create less friction for you, and just means you've got more time to do the things you want to do. So yeah, so if you are using an online system, use it, get it set up right, and it will help structure your process. If you don't use an online system, then that's fine. It's like, what does your process look like from there? Think about, with regards to paraplanners, administrators, it's important to involve your paraplanner or your administrator, if you have one, at every part of your process, and they understand what the process is, so you agree with them from the start what your roles are, what that process looks like, what your roles are within that. So does it mean that if a lead comes in and you don't contact them, do then the administrator follow that up? Does your paraplanner follow that up? Or actually is that down to you to follow that up? Agree that once, get your process and know that's the process nailed. So like I say, if you do get them booked in and if you don't use an online system, what does that look like from your point of view? Do you send them a confirmation email at that point? Do you lay out what you need, documents you need at that point, or do you do that further down the line? Do you also look at things like check my file? So like, would you get a check my file at this stage in the process? For me, I would say yes, as long as the client understands why they're doing it and the benefits to them. So that's fine. But what do they need to do preparation wise for your first appointment when you're going to go through the fact find? So what documents do you expect? Do you expect them to do a check my file? If you do, get that part of your process and explain to them. And like I said before, if they do get booked in, make sure that you're into your CRM system, your client management system at this stage, because this is all data that you need. So looked at point one, which is a lead and how that looks. What does it look like when that lead becomes a client? So you do get them booked in for a first appointment, you conduct the fact find, you do the first appointment. And one thing to remember is that you will follow a process within your fact find, and that will be habitual because you will be doing this all the time, every day, every week. You'll be going through your fact find. So that, if you look at this from a process point of view, that's process within a process, that you've got your fact find process, and make sure that's well structured as well, and making sure, and you'll follow that because it's habitual, because you've been doing it day in day out. So it's the same thing with regards to the overall process, is that you do this day in day out, it will just become habit forming and it's more likely to happen. So you do your fact find, what does a post appointment process look like from there? When do you do your research? How do you do your research? Who does your research? Who feeds back to the client? When do you feed back to the client? Think about what your process is. Think about this stage, and one thing to talk about and look at is under promise and over deliver. I know I talk about that in one of my frustrations. One thing that annoys me is over promising, under delivering. And so think about this at your stage, you're part of your process. Think about under promising and over delivering. And what I mean by that is, part of your process, do your research after your fact find. You then say to your client, okay, I'll get back to you by Wednesday. If you then get back to them on Tuesday, is positive experience for that client. You're going above expectations, which is a good experience for them. What you don't want to happen is then come back to them Wednesday night, sort of saying, I've still not done research yet and I'll get back to you tomorrow. Or you don't contact them at all on Wednesday and then you get back to them Thursday. Don't be on the back foot. You need to be on the front foot with your process, when I get my words out right. So, done your fact find, done your research, done your sign up, all part of your process. What does case progression look like? When does that happen? How often does that happen? Who does that? So again, power planners, administrators, automated stuff, get it into your process. Protection as well at this stage. So think about, not necessarily at this stage, but when does it come into your process? Do you signpost protection in your first appointment and talk about it? You tell them that you talk about it later. Do you go full hog in your first appointment and get everything nailed from there? Just think about when you're going to go through clients' needs, priorities, shortfalls, budgets, all those sorts of things. Is that during your first appointment or is that post offer? Find out what works for you. There's no right or wrong with this. Is find out what works for you in terms of your process, but make sure you get it as part of your process. So protection needs to be part of your process. Also as well, other third party referrals to think about, such as estate planning, financial advice, when do they come into play? What we've already talked about is, check my file, which you should be utilising and generating income from. But with the third party referrals, such as estate planning, financial advice, have you got somebody you work with? Have you got somebody to refer to? If you haven't, talked about before, the importance of doing that. Make sure that is part of your process as well. And also as well, getting a review, because that needs to be part of your process. Done other podcasts on reviews, so I've talked about it before. We're not going to talk about it today, but just get reviews as part of your process. And then the last thing to look at is then post-completion. So what does post-completion process look like? Is it a case of see you in 2 years, see you in 5 years and no contact? I would say no. If you do not contact your client for the next 2-5 years, you will not have a successful mortgage broker business, because you are far more likely to lose that client if you don't have any contact with them and there's no contact strategy. So you need a process for your post-completion strategy. On the day they move in, do you send them an email? Is it a new homes card? Do you send them flowers? Do you send them a Just Eat voucher? That's something that I know some brokers do. What does that look like? What about referrals? When do those come into play? When do you ask for those? What part of your process is asking for referrals? Make sure that asking for referrals is part of your process. When do you sweep up the missed opportunities? So think about, you didn't get the protection, you haven't referred them to estate planning yet, you've not referred them to a financial advisor. We're not going to talk about the benefits of doing all those things or what those things bring, but having it as part of your process, you need to make sure that if you've not got that converted the first attempt, you need to have some sort of contact strategy or missed opportunity review, follow up as part of your process. That's key to what you're doing. So just think about what is your process for your contract strategy. And like I say, just wrapped around all this, I've talked about CRMs, I've talked about administrators, power planners. Now, there are CRMs that can help with this, there are client management systems that can help with this. And what I'd say is, if you do have one, use it to its full capability, because you will be able to automate a lot of the process, you'll be able to get a lot of support around the process. So if you've got a CRM, you've got a client management system, make sure that it's set up right to follow what process you want it to follow, and it will just help make sure that you follow your process every single time. Set up your workflows, can take a bit of time to set up. Once that's set up, it just does it for you automatically. So as soon as you've done one thing, tick that task, it then moves on to the next one, and the workflow helps create habits to then make sure that you follow your process every single time. So like I say, you've got CRMs that can help you do that. What about your administrator or your power planning support? Again, I talked about it. What does that look like in terms of how involved are with the process? How transparent are you with them in terms of the process? Are you working as a team with regards to your process? So agree what process looks like, work it through with your power planner administrator, who does what when, and it literally is hand off. I've done this, it's now their job. They do that, then they hand it back to you, and just get that process nailed. Because if you've got support, make sure you use it. So just to recap, the 3 things to look at is making sure that you have a process for everything you do, whether that's when a lead comes in, whether that's when you've got a client, or when you've got post-completion and the client's moved in. What does your process look like from that point of view? Making sure that you've got it as part to make sure that you're not missing any opportunities, and also as well you've got some follow-up with it as well. So just to recap, having a process is key to being a successful mortgage broker. It doesn't matter whether you're self-employed, employed, having a process, well-structured process that is nailed and habitual will make sure that you are a successful mortgage broker. Thank you for listening to the Mortgage Broker Broadcast, the podcast which helps mortgage brokers at all stages of their mortgage broking career. If you have any questions about this podcast or any topics you want us to discuss, or if you're interested in working with me further, then please get in touch.